Hello, this is Miss Hennigan, and I'm going to be reading Chapter 2 of And Then There Were None. And in Chapter 2, the guests are arriving at the island, and I have this poem at the top of this video that I have up on the screen because this poem, the 10 Little Soldier Boys, becomes very important. Okay, so Chapter 2, The Boat to the Island. Outside Bridge Station, a little group of people, the guests, stood in momentary uncertainty. Behind them stood porters with suitcases. One of these called Jim. The driver of one of the taxis stepped forward. "Yuma for Soldier Island, maybe?" he asked in a soft Devon voice. 4 voices gave assent, and then immediately afterwards gave quick, surreptitious glances at each other. The driver said, addressing his remarks to Mr. Justice Wargrave as the senior member of the party, "There are 2 taxis here, sir. One of them must wait till the slower train from Exeter gets in. A matter of 5 minutes. There's one gentleman coming by that. Perhaps one of you wouldn't mind waiting. You'd be more comfortable that way." Vera Claythorne, her own secretarial position clear in mind, spoke at once. "I'll wait," she said. "If you will go on." She looked at the other 3. Her glance and voice had the slight suggestion of command, and that it comes from having occupied a position of authority. She might have been directing which tennis sets the girls were to play in. Miss Brent said stiffly, "Thank you," bent her head and entered one of the taxis, the door of which the driver was holding up. Mr. Justice Wargrave followed her. Captain Lombard said, "I'll wait with Miss Claythorne," said Vera. "My name is Lombard, Philip Lombard." The porters were piling luggage on the taxi. The porters are kind of like butlers or the people that are helping. They're like attendants at the airport. The porters were piling luggage on the taxi. Inside, Mr. Justice Wargrave said with dual legal caution, "Beautiful weather we're having." Miss Brent said, "Yes, indeed." A very distinguished old gentleman, she thought to herself. Quite unlike the usual type of man in seaside guest house. Evidently, Mrs. or Miss Oliver had some good connections. Mr. Justice Wargrave inquired, "Do you know this part of the world well?" "I have been to Cornwall and to Torquay, but this is my first visit to this part of Devon." The judge said, "I am also unacquainted with this part of the world." The taxi drove off. So now they've all got onto the train, and there's 2 taxis waiting to take them to the furthest part of like the ocean, and they're going to get on a boat, and they're going to sail out to this little island off the coast. The driver of the second taxi said, "Like to sit inside while you're waiting?" Vera said decisively, "Not at all." Captain Lombard smiled. He said, "That sunny wall looks more attractive, unless you'd rather go inside the station." "No, indeed. It's so delightful to get out of the stuffy train." He answered, "Yes, traveling by train is rather trying in this weather." Vera said conventionally, "I do hope it lasts. The weather, I mean. Our English summers are so treacherous." With a slight lack of originality, Lombard asked, "Do you know this part of the world well?" "No, I've never been here before," she added quickly, conscientiously determined to make her position clear at once. "I haven't even seen my employer yet." "Your employer?" "Yes, I'm Miss Owen's secretary." "Oh, I see." His manner changed. It was slightly more assured, easier in tone. "Isn't that rather unusual?" he said. Vera laughed. "Oh, no, I don't think so. Her own secretary was suddenly taken ill, and she wired to an agency for a substitute, and they sent me." "So that was it. And suppose you don't like the post when you've got there?" Vera laughed again. "Oh, it's only temporary, a holidays or vacation post. I've got a permanent job at a girls' school. As a matter of fact, I'm frightfully thrilled at the prospect of seeing Soldier Island. There's been such a lot about it in the papers. It's really very fascinating." Lombard said, "I don't know. I haven't seen it." "Oh, really? The Owens are frightfully keen on it, I suppose. What are they like? Do tell me." Lombard thought. Lombard is the captain, the police officer. "Awkward this. Am I supposed to have met them or not?" He quickly said, "There's a wasp crawling up your arm. No, keep quite still." He made a convincing pounce. "There, it's gone." "Oh, thank you. There are a lot of wasps about this summer." Yes, I suppose it's the heat. Who are we waiting for, do you know? I haven't the least idea, said Vera. The loud, drawn-out scream of an approaching train was heard. Lombard said, That will be the train now. He was a tall, solitary old man who appeared at the exit of the platform. His gray hair was clipped close, and had a neatly trimmed white mustache. His porter, staggering slightly under the weight of the solid leather suitcase, indicated Vera and Lombard. Vera came forward in a competent manner. She said, I'm Mrs. Owen's secretary. This is a car here waiting. She added, This is Mr. Lombard. The faded blue eyes, shrewd in spite of their age, sized up Lombard. For a moment, a judgment shone in them. Had there been anyone to read it? Good-looking fellow, something just a little wrong about him. The three of them got into the waiting taxi. They drove through the sleepy streets of Little Oakbridge and continued at about a mile on the main Plymouth Road. Then they plunged into a maze of cross-country lanes, deep, green, and narrow. They're driving down closer to the coast. General MacArthur said, Don't know this part of Devon at all. My little place is in East Devon, just on the borderline of Dorset. Vera said, It really is lovely here. The hills and the red earth and everything so green and luscious looking. Philip Lombard said critically, It's a bit shut in. I like open country myself, where you can see what's coming. General MacArthur said to him, You've seen a bit of the world, I fancy, or I guess. Lombard shrugged his shoulders disparagingly. I've knocked around here and there, sir. He thought to himself, He'll ask me now if I was old enough to be in the war. These old boys always do. But General MacArthur did not mention the war. I wonder why. They came over a steep hill and down a zigzag track to Sticklehaven, a mere cluster of cottages with a fishing boat or two drawn up on the beach. Illuminated by the setting sun, they had their first glimpse of Soldier Island, jutting up out of the sea to the south. Vera surprised. It's a long way out. She had pictured it differently. Close to shore, crowned with a beautiful white house. But there was no house visible. Only the boldly silhouetted rock with its faint resemblance to a giant head. There was something sinister about it. She shivered frankly. So that's the description of the island, and sinister is a negative description. This might be a good example of foreshadowing. Outside a little inn, the Seven Star, 3 people were sitting. There was a hunched elderly figure of a judge, the upright form of Miss Brent, and a third man, a big bluff man, who came forward and introduced himself. Thought we might as well wait for you, he said. Make one trip of it. Allow me to introduce myself. Name's Davis. Natal. South Africa's my natal spot. Haha. Now, I don't know if you remember from chapter 1, but Mr. Davis is actually Mr. Bloor. Mr. Bloor is the one that knows all the names of the guests, and he was hired almost maybe like as a private investigator. So he's telling all of these people that his name is Davis, but his name is really Bloor, William Bloor. He laughed breezily. Mr. Justice Wargrave looked at him with active malevolence. He seemed to be wishing that he could order the court to be cleared. Miss Emily Brent was clearly not sure if she liked colonels. Anyone care for a little nip before we embark? Asked Mr. Davis hospitably. Nobody assenting to this proposition. Mr. Davis turned and held up a finger. Mustn't delay then. Our good host and hostess will be expecting us, he said. He might have noticed the curious constraint came over the other members of the party. It was as though the mention of their host and hostesses had a curious paralyzing effect on the guests. It's very suspicious. Paralyzing means you can't move, and paralyzing is not a positive description. In response to Davis's beckoning finger, a man detached himself from a nearby wall against which he was leaning and came up to them. His rolling gait proclaimed him as a man of the sea. He had a weather-beaten face and dark eyes with a slightly evasive expression. He spoke in his soft Devon voice. Will you be ready to starting for the island, ladies and gentlemen? The boats are waiting. There's 2 gentlemen coming by car, but Mr. Owen orders was not to wait for them as they might arrive at any time. The party got up. Their guide led them along a small stony jetty. Alongside, it's a motorboat was lying. Miss Brent said, "That's a very small boat." The boat's owner said pervasively, "She's a fine boat, that man. You could go to Plymouth in her as easy as winking." Mr. Justice Wargrave said sharply, "There are a good many of us." "She'd take a tumble, double the number, sir." Philip Lombard said in a pleasant, easy voice, "It's quite all right. Glorious weather. No swell, no storm." Rather doubtfully, Miss Brent, she's the old one who's kind of stuck up, permitted herself to be helped into the boat. The others followed suit. There was as yet no fraternizing among the party. It was as though each member of it was puzzled by the other member. So they're all in the boat kind of checking each other out suspiciously. They were just about to cast loose when their guide paused, boat hook in hand. Down the steep track into the village, a car was coming, a car so frantically powerful, so supervescently beautiful that it had all the nature of an apparition. At the wheel sat a young man, Anthony Marston, his hair blown back in the wood. In the blaze of the evening, he looked like not a man, but a young god, a hero god out of a northern saga. He touched the horn, and a great roar of sound echoed from the rocks of the bay. It was a fantastic moment. In it, Anthony Marston seemed to be something more than mortal. Afterwards, more than one of those present remembered that moment. That's interesting. Afterwards, more than one of those present remembered that moment. Fred Narcott, he's the guy that's going to take them up to the house. Fred Narcott sat by the engine thinking to himself that this was a queer lot, like a strange lot. Not at all his idea of what Mr. Owen's guests were likely to be. He'd expected something altogether more classy, togged up women and gentlemen in yachting costume and all very rich and important looking. Not at all like Mr. Elmer Robertson's party. A faint grin came to Fred Narcott's lips as he remembered the millionaire's guests. That had been a party, if you'd like, and the drink they'd gotten through. This Mr. Owen must be a very different sort of gentleman. Funny it was, though, Fred, that he'd never yet set his eyes on Owen. Or the missus either. Fred Narcott is the guy who's taking them out on the boat and back. Everything ordered and paid for by that Mr. Morse. Instructions always very clear and payment prompt, but it was odd all the same. The papers said there was some mystery about Owen. Mr. Narcott agreed with him. Perhaps, after all, it was Miss Gabrielle Turtle who had bought the island, but that theory departed from him as he surveyed his passengers. Not this lot. None of them looked likely to have anything to do with a film star. He summed them up dispassionately. An old maid, a sour kind. He knew them well enough. She was a Tartar, he could bet. Old military gentleman. Real army look around him. Nice-looking young lady, but ordinarily kind, not glamorous. No Hollywood touch about her. That bluffy, cheery gent. He wasn't a real gentleman. Retired tradesman, that's what he is, thought Fred Narcott. The other gentleman, the lean, hungry-looking gentleman with the quick eyes, he was a strange one, he was. Just possibly he might have something to do with the pictures. No, there was only one satisfactory passenger in the boat. The last gentleman. The one who had arrived in the car. And what a car! A car such as had never been seen in Stricklehaven before. Must have cost hundreds and hundreds, a car like that. He was the right kind. Born to money, he was. If the party had been all like him, he'd understand it. Queer business. Queer means strange also. Queer business when you think of it. The whole thing was queer. Strange, strange, strange. The boat turned its way around the rock. Now, at last, the house came into view. The south side of the island was quite different. It shelved gently down to the sea. The house was there facing south, low and square and modern-looking to the rounded windows. An exciting house. A house that lived up to expectation. I'm going to pause reading for a minute because I want to show you this video of the group arriving at the island. Now, this was based on a movie, but it's still very interesting. So this must be Ethel Rogers back at the house. and this is the group arriving at the island.
This way, just up here. Afternoon. Welcome to Soldier Island.
That's Mr. and Mrs. Rogers.
Right. Come along.
Back to the reading. I'm on page 29 in the book. This is still chapter 2. An exciting house, a house that lived up to expectation. Fred and Arcot shut off the engine. They nosed their way gently into a little natural inlet between the rocks. Philip Lombard said sharply, "Must be different to land here in dirty weather or bad weather." Fred and Arcot said cheerfully, "We can't land on Soldier Island when there's southeasterly. Sometimes 'tis cut off for a week or more," meaning that sometimes the weather is so bad that nobody can get there for over a week. Vera Clairefield thought, "The catering must be very difficult. That's the worst of an island. All the domestic problems are so worrying." The boat grated against the rocks. Fred and Arcot jumped out, and he and Lombard helped the others to alight. Arcot made the boat fast to a ring in the rock. Then they led the way up the steps cut in the cliff. Joe MacArthur said, "Ha, delightful spot." But he felt uneasy. Damn odd sort of spot. General MacArthur, he's been in war and battle and stuff like that, so he's used to being in uncomfortable positions. So for him to kind of think or feel uneasy means something because he's had to read those kind of situations. Page 30. As the party ascended the steps and came out on a terrace above, their spirits revived. In the open doorway of the house, a correct butler was awaiting them. That's Mr. Rogers. And something about his gravity reassured them. And then the house itself was really most attractive, the view from the terrace magnificent. The butler came forward, bowing slightly. He was a tall, lank man, gray-haired and very respectful. He said, "Will you come this way, please?" In the wide hall, drinks stood ready, rows of bottles. Anthony Marston's spirits cheered up a little. He'd been thinking that this was a rum kind of show, none of his lot. What could old Badger have been thinking about to let him in this? However, the drinks were all right, plenty of ice too. What was it the butler chap was saying? Mr. Owen unfortunately delayed, unable to get here till tomorrow. Instructions, everything they wanted, if they would like to go to their rooms, dinner would be at 8 o'clock. Vera had followed Mrs. Rogers upstairs. The woman had thrown open a door at the end of a passage, and Vera had walked into a delightful bedroom with a big window that opened wide upon the sea and another looking east. She uttered a quick exclamation of pleasure. Miss Rogers was saying, "I hope you've got everything you want, miss." Vera looked around. Her luggage had been brought up and had been unpacked. At one side of the room, a door stood open to a blue-tiled bathroom. She said quickly, "Yes, everything, I think." "You'll ring the bell if you want something, miss." Miss Rogers had a flat, monotonous voice. Vera looked at her curiously. "What a white, bloodless ghost of a woman." This is a good description of Mrs. Rogers on page 31 for that character chart. Very respectable looking, with her hair dragged back from her face and her black dress. Queer light eyes that shifted the whole time from place to place. Vera thought, she looks frightened of her own shadow. Why would she be so frightened? Yes, that was it, frightened. She looked like a woman who was in mortal fear. A little shiver passed down Vera's back. What on earth was this woman afraid of? She said pleasantly, "I'm Mrs. Owen's new secretary. I expect you know that." Miss Rogers said, "No, miss, I don't know anything. Just the list of the ladies and gentlemen and what rooms they were to have." Vera said, "Miss Owens didn't mention me?" Mrs. Rogers' eyelashes flickered. "I haven't seen Mrs. Owen. Not yet. We only came here 2 days ago." Extraordinary people, these Owens, thought Vera. Aloud she said, "What staff is there here?" "Just me and Rogers, miss." Vera frowned. 8 people in the house, 10 with the host and hostess, and only one married couple to do for them? Mrs. Rogers said, "I'm a good cook and Rogers is handy about the house. I didn't know, of course, that there would be such a large party." Vera said, "But can you manage?" "Oh, yes, miss, I can manage. If there's to be a large party, often perhaps Mrs. Owens could get extra help in." Vera said, "I expect so." Mrs. Rogers turned to go. Her feet moved noiselessly over the ground. She drifted from the room like a shadow. That's kind of spooky. Vera went over to the window and sat down on the window seat. She was faintly disturbed. Everything somehow was a little queer or strange. The absence of the Owens, the pale ghost like Miss Rogers, and the guests. Yes, the guests were queer too, an oddly assorted party, like different groups from different classes and different occupations hanging out together. Vera thought, "I wish I'd seen the Owens. I wish I knew what they were like." She got up and walked restlessly about the room. A perfect bedroom decorated throughout in a modern style. Off-white rugs on the gleaming parquet floor, faintly tinted walls, a long mirror surrounded by lights, a mantelpiece bare of ornaments save for an enormous block of white marble shaped like a bear, a piece of modern sculpture in which was inset a clock. Over it, in a gleaming frame, was a big square of parchment, a poem. She stood in front of the fireplace and read it. It was the old nursery rhyme she remembered from her childhood days. And I'm going to play that because this is a very important piece of the book, the poem 10 Little Soldier Boys. Ignore this.
Ten little soldier boys went out to dine. One choked his little self, and then there were 9. 9 little soldier boys sat up very late. One overslept himself, and then there were 8. 8 little soldier boys traveling in Devon. One said he'd stay there, and then there were 7. 7 little soldier boys chopping up sticks. One chopped himself in half, and then there were 6. 6 little soldier boys playing with a hive. The bumblebee stung one, and then there were 5. 5 little soldier boys going in for law. One got in chancery, and then there were 4. 4 little soldier boys going out to sea. A red herring swallowed one, and then there were 3. 3 little soldier boys walking in the zoo. A big bear hugged one, and then there were 2. 2 little soldier boys sitting in the sun. One got frizzled up, and then there was 1. 1 little soldier boy left all alone. He went and hanged himself, and then there were none.
Dun dun dun. Vera smiled, of course. This was Soldier Island. She went and sat again by the window looking out to sea. How big the sea was! From here there was no land to be seen anywhere, just a vast expanse of blue water rippling in the evening sun. The sea, so peaceful today, sometimes so cruel. The sea that dragged you down to its depth. Drowned, found drowned, drowned at sea, drowned, drowned. No! She wouldn't remember. She would not think of it. All that was over. So she's having some type of flashback. Dr. Armstrong came to Soldier Island just as the sun was sinking into the sea. On the way across, he chatted the boatman, a local man. He was anxious to find out a little bit more about these people who owned Soldier Island, but the man, Narcott, seemed curiously ill-formed or perhaps unwilling to talk. So Armstrong chatted instead of the weather and fishing. He was tired after his long motor drive. His eyeballs ached. Driving west, you were driving against the sun. Yes, he was very tired. The sea and perfect peace, that's what he needed. He would like really to take a long holiday, but he couldn't afford to do that. He could afford it financially, of course, but he couldn't afford to drop out. You were soon forgotten nowadays. No, now that he had arrived, he had just kept his nose to the grindstone. He thought, all the same this evening, I'll imagine to myself I'm not going back, and I'm done with London and Harley Street and all the rest. There was something magical about an island. The mere word suggested fantasy. You lost touch with the world. An island was a world of its own, a world perhaps from which you might never return. This is another kind of suspicious idea. The island and weather and the sea could also almost be their own character in the way they describe, like it's beautiful, but it's also dangerous. He thought, I'm leaving my ordinary life behind me. And smiling to himself, he began to make plans. Fantastic plans for the future. He was still smiling when he walked up the rock-cut steps. In a chair on the terrace, an old gentleman was sitting, and the sight of him was vaguely familiar to Dr. Armstrong. Where he had seen the frog-like face and tortoise-like neck, that hunched-up attitude, yes, and those pale, shrewd little eyes. Of course, old Wargrave. So Dr. Armstrong recognizes one person. But it's not a very pleasant description. He'd given evidence once before him. Always looked half asleep, but was shrewd as could be when it came to the point of law. He had great power with jury. It was said he can make their minds up for them any day of the week. He got one or two unlikely convictions out of them. A hanging judge, some people would say. That means that, like, this judge that just retired, he got most of the cases were convicted under him. Funny place to meet him, here, out of the world. Mr. Justice Wargrave thought to himself, Armstrong, remember him in the witness box, very correct and cautious. All doctors are damn fools. Harley Street ones are the worst of all the lot. And his mind dwelt maleficently on the recent interview he had with the suave personage in that very street. Aloud he grunted, Drinks are in the hall. Dr. Armstrong said, I must go and pay my respects to my host and hostesses. Mr. Justice Wargrave closed his eyes again, looking decidedly reptilian, and said, That's also a strange description. You can't say that. You can't do that. Dr. Armstrong was startled. Why not? The judge said, No host and hostess. Very curious state of affairs. Don't understand this place. Dr. Armstrong stared at him for a minute. When he thought the old gentleman had actually gone to sleep, Wargrave said suddenly, Do you know Constance Colmington? No, I'm afraid not. It's of no consequence, said the judge, a very vague woman, in practically unreadable handwriting. I was just wondering if I had come to the wrong house. Dr. Armstrong shook his head and went up to the house. Mr. Justice Wargrave reflected on the subject of Constance Colmington. Undependable like all women. His mind went on to the two women in the house. The tight-lipped old maid, Miss Brent, and the girl, Vera Claythorne. She didn't care for the girl, cold-blooded young hussy. No, 3 women, if you counted Roger's woman. She was an odd creature. She looked scared to death. Vera Claythorne also made that observation. Respectful pair and knew their job. Rogers coming out of the terrace that minute, the judge asked him, Is Lady Constance Colmington expected, do you know? Roger stared at him. No, sir, not to my knowledge. The judge's eyebrows rose, but he only grunted. He thought, Soldier Island? There's a fly in the ointment. Anthony Marston, he's the young guy in the car, was in his bath. He luxuriated in the steaming water. His limbs had felt cramped after his long drive. Very few thoughts passed through his head. Anthony was a creature of sensation, of action. He thought to himself, must go through with it, I suppose. There, after dismissed everything from his mind, warm, steaming water, tired limbs, presently a shave, a cocktail dinner, and after? Mr. Bloor was tying his tie. He wasn't very good at this sort of thing. Did he look all right? He supposed so. Nobody had been exactly cordial to him. Funny the way they all eyed each other, as though they knew, ... Knew what? That should make you curious as a reader. So, Mr. Bloor, he's the one who's presenting himself as Mr. Davis, knows something about why they're there, but we don't know as readers. Well, it was up to him. He didn't mean to bungle his job. He glanced at the framed nursery rhyme over the mantelpiece. Neat touch, having that there. He thought, remember this island when I was a kid. Never thought I'd be doing this sort of job. What sort of job? And a house here. Good thing, perhaps, that one can't foresee the future. So he also has the poem in his room. General MacArthur was frowning to himself. Damn it all, the whole thing was deuced odd. Not at all what I'd been led to expect. For 2 pins, he'd make an excuse and get away. Throw up the whole business. But the motorboat had gone back to the mainland. He'd have to stay. That fellow Lombard now, he was a queer chap. Not straight. He'd swear the man wasn't straight. As the gong sounded, Philip Lombard came out of the room and walked to the head of the stairs. He moved like a panther. That's another description of a person being like an animal. A panther is kind of sleek and sneaky. Smoothly and noiselessly. There was something of the panther about him altogether, a beast of prey, pleasant to the eye. He was smiling to himself. A week, eh? He was going to enjoy that week. In her bedroom, Emily Brent, dressed in black silk, ready for dinner, was reading her Bible. Her lips moved as she read as she followed the words. The heathen are sunk into the pit, and that they made, and the net which they hid is their own foot taken. The Lord is known by the judgment which he executeth. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hands. The wicked shall be turned to hell. She's very pious and thinks that people should be punished, and that she thinks that she's better than people. Her lips tight closed. She shut the Bible. Rising, she pinned a brooch to her neck and went down to dinner. Okay, so this is the end of chapter 2, and they've all arrived at the island. They've all gone to their rooms, and they're all kind of wondering and sizing each other up, wondering who each other is, wondering where their hosts are. Several of them have noticed this 10 Little Soldier Boys poem in their room. And so we're just trying to get to know more of their personalities. So now we're going to stop here, and the next chapter will be chapter 3. Thank you.